have just met Ann. We've talked a little bit over email, and we've had an opportunity this afternoon to talk. She has written the book, Get Out of the Box. Of course, it's over on the table, and Ann will be happy to sign it for you as well later tonight or tomorrow. But it is published by Market Square Books. She also has a website, Bright Ideas for Church Leaders. That website is on your handout. If you turn to your folder, you'll find the schedule for us, but you will also find on the right side all of the presentations that we will be doing and handouts. So you've got the information, and her website is on one of those handouts. I am thrilled and excited for the leadership that Ann will bring us tonight. She is on staff at the chapel, which is a multi-site United Methodist Church in coastal Georgia. There are actually 3 sites for the chapel. In addition, she is serving as the multi-campus director she's serving as congregational development for the South Georgia Conference. Her emphasis has been on providing leadership development programs for both clergy and laity, especially in the areas of creativity and innovation. She knows how to get us out of that box and will be helping us get out of that box tonight. The book has been called a primer on creative thinking and innovative thinking. And she said in a recent email to me, during this time of transition and change in our denomination and world, we need leaders able to think outside the box, to find new ways to accomplish our mission of making disciples for the transformation of the world. We don't need leaders who are looking for us to tell them what to do, but we are looking for leaders who are learning how to think and using innovative, creative skills to think. She further says, I've discovered that when church leaders realize their potential to think differently and solve old problems in new ways, they are set free to worship and reach new people in new ways. We are delighted that Ann is with us to help us all think creatively and innovatively. The way the planning team put our presentations together, we will have an hour-and-a-half presentation with Ann, and following that, we will have a local Holston conference missional hub leader or leader to help us think about how we can apply what we hear tonight to our own context here within the conference. And then after that, you will have some time as a district to have conversation to further narrow that down and say, what does this say to us as a district? And what difference does it make, and what can we make? How can we use the information that we've learned tonight to make a difference? So Ann, we are delighted you are here with us, and Leah, thank you for giving the response afterwards.
For having me. I am so excited to be here. I've been talking with Leah and talking with Susan for quite some time and been counting. And you're just sitting there doing your thing, and then all of a sudden a small group comes over and they start talking about something. And all of a sudden, even though you're doing your thing, you begin listening into that other conversation. I mean, like, not just, oh yeah, I just hear them talking, but all of a sudden something catches your attention and you start listening. And you don't really mean to, but this happened to me. Did you guys know that there are basketball players here? Okay, well, I was in the lobby trying to get some work done, trying to answer emails and things like this, and I'm watching these basketball players come in, and they're going in this room, and they're getting their little pep talks and things like that from the coaches. And what was so interesting was that there was a group of players that went in, and you could just tell by the look on their face, it didn't go well. I mean, you, especially with teenagers, I have a teenager, and you know that shoulder slump kind of thing that, you know, that half pouty kind of walk that they do. And so these teenagers kind of file in, and the coaches, I live with Coach. They kind of have this pouty thing too going on, you know, and I'm like, oh, this is not going to go well. And the coaches, instead of following the players into the room, you guys know what they did? They sat outside, and they had to have the little conference before. Okay, so I thought, I wonder what this is going to be like, you know? So the coaches are talking, and the first one says, this team needs to get out of that box. I was like, okay, what just happened, you know? And they were just talking about how this team, they just need to start thinking creatively. They need to start innovating. I mean, what in the world? If something doesn't go like we plan in practice, what are they going to do? Like, they don't know how to be flexible. And I was so encouraged, because I thought even 15-year-olds need to get out of that box. This is not just a generational thing. It's not just a church thing. It's not just an old people, young people, whatever people thing. It is so easy for us to get stuck in a box. Whether we're 15 and we're playing basketball, whether we're a coach and we're coaching people, or whether we are pastors and leaders who are coaching people through life. And so today, what we're going to do is spend a little bit of time thinking about, what is that box? And then we're going to figure out, okay, well, how do we get out of that box? And what are things that are keeping us inside of our box? Because if we can get rid of those roadblocks, then maybe we have a better chance of being creative and innovative. So to get started, we can imagine what getting out of the box looks like in terms of a 15-year-old in a basketball game. But what does that look like in ministry for us to be stuck in a box? Well, if you guys will watch this little opening video that I have for you guys, maybe it's going to come up.
Meet Dave. Dave is on the leadership team at his church. Dave faithfully goes to meetings every month. He arrives just in time, talks with the other team members about limited resources and reasons why the church isn't growing, and wonders why they don't seem to be making any progress. Then Dave goes home frustrated and wondering if they really accomplished anything at all. Dave and his team are working in a box, a limiting box of their own making that is defined by unquestioned assumptions, negative thoughts, fear, and limitations. Dave's team is allowing their church and ministries to be defined by that box, and they have succumbed to the thinking that this is as good as it gets. Meet Sue. Sue is on staff at a church across town. Sue faithfully goes to leadership team meetings every month. She arrives early, prepares the meeting room for a collaborative experience, serves coffee and snacks, and leads the team in creative brain-stretching activities and conversations. They question what is, imagine what could be, and encourage each other to realize their creative potential. They look at problems from all sides, dream about possibilities, discuss prevailing assumptions, and push themselves to try new things they've never done before. Sue leaves energized and excited to see if the plans they've made will draw people closer to Christ. Sue's team is free of constraints. They realize they are inherently creative, each in their own unique way. And when they get together as a team and put all of those diverse creative giftings together, they begin to ask thought-provoking questions that lead to innovative ideas, causing every member of the team to stretch and grow. The collaborative energy created in this room spreads and expands into other ministry areas within the church, until they begin to develop new answers to old problems. Sue's church begins to impact their community in new and creative ways that reach people they have never reached before. What is your experience in ministry and church leadership? Are your meetings more like Dave's or Sue's? Do your thoughts focus on the limitations or the possibilities? Are your conversations sparked with an air of excitement or negativity? Do you feel stuck, or are you moving forward toward growth, faith, and trust? No matter how long you've been working in a box or how tightly that box has been sealed, it's possible to break free from the constraints of sameness and move into uncharted waters of creativity and innovation. It's time for you to get out of that box.
So before we start thinking about how to get out of the box, let's start figuring out, what is my box? I mean, I think we have to define the box before we can figure out how to get out of that box. And so what I'd like for you guys to do is on your handout or in a notebook, we're going to do a little bit of drawing as we go throughout our time together, okay? These drawings will not be posted and displayed on the wall, okay? You don't even have to share them, so don't be ashamed. This is creative space. But what I want you guys to do is just draw a simple box. And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes within your missional hubs to just think about what are one or two things that are kind of inside dynamics, group boxes that we make for ourselves and we put ourselves inside. But then we also have individual boxes that we put ourselves inside. So what do we do in order to get out of these boxes, in order to break free from this? Well, I think the answer lies in creativity. And so what I want to do now is kind of take a little survey, okay, and see how many of you guys would consider yourselves to be a creative person. Raise your hand if you think, yes, I'm a creative person. And this is just a statement of fact. It's not, oh, you're bragging, okay? That's not what we're talking about, okay? So quite a few of you guys think that you are a creative person. Okay, who wants to be a creative person? How many of you guys would like to be a creative person? All right, most of the people in the room want to be creative, all right? What about the next one? How many of you guys consider your church to be a creative church? Raise your hand if you think you are a part of a creative church. All right, some of you guys are like, I'm about here. Okay, that's good. Okay, how many of you guys would like for your church to be creative, or at least more creative? Okay, look around the room. Everybody raise your hand. Look around the room. We have the desire to be creative in the church, don't we? We do. We know that we want to be creative. We know that we should be creative, but really what's keeping us from that is that we put ourselves in this box. So if we think about creativity, how do you define creativity? I mean, creativity is so difficult to define. It's difficult to pin down. You know it when you see it, but it's really hard to define it. So when I went to define creativity, here was an interesting definition that was on dictionary.com. Oh, I went too far. Creativity, dictionary.com says, is the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations, etc. That is a broad definition, right? And I love the fact that they're not even pinning their definition down. Like they're saying, etc., and the like, right? Creativity is hard to define, but the thing I like about this definition are those two words that are circled. If you guys have your handout, just take a moment and circle those two words on your handout, okay? Transcend and create. Because here's the interesting thing. A lot of times we think of creativity as coming out of the blue. It's something brand new that nobody's ever done before, nobody's ever seen before. Creativity really stands on the shoulders of existing stuff. It stands on the shoulders of what has been done in the past. When we create and innovate, we're not just saying everything that's been done in the past is terrible. No, we're saying we're going to transcend what's been done in the past to do something new that is innovative and relevant for today. So I love that word transcend, that it's building on what has already been done and proven, and it's creating something new on top of that. So as you think about that, think about the traditions and all of the amazing things that have happened in the past in your church. To innovate and to create is not just to do away with it, it's to build on top of that and say, okay, what's the next level for today that will help reach new people in new ways with the gospel? You know, creativity, you know it when you see it, and you know that it's hard to define. When does it happen? This is one of my favorite definitions of when creativity happens. Creativity happens when limited resources are combined with a determination to continue. Two key phrases: limited resources and determination to continue. How many of you guys would raise your hand and say, yes, we have limited resources? Absolutely, all of us have limited resources, right? And so many times we think, well, I could be more creative if I just had all the resources I needed. I'm going to challenge you guys on that, and I'm going to push back. If you had unlimited resources, you would be less creative, because you would just go buy what somebody else has already created. We are people who usually would like the path of least resistance, right? Instead of fighting and struggling and dealing with some difficulties, we would just like to say, yeah, let me just go buy that. Let me just go get that. Let me just go have that. But what's interesting is when we have limited resources, and that is coupled with a determination to continue, because our goal and our mission is so big and so great that so much is riding on it, which is exactly what the bishop was talking about earlier. When we have that determination to continue in the midst of limited resources, then we are forced to be creative. Have you guys ever heard that phrase, I'm forced to be creative? That's when the most creativity happens, is when you don't have everything that you need, but you know you have to keep going. So what does that look like? What does that look like, and how do we do it? Well, the first thing that we've got to do is we have to realize that there is a myth about creativity that is untrue. When you guys were doing, the survey says, when you were raising your hand, and only some of you guys raised your hand on the question, who is creative? That is a myth. There's this myth that somehow some of us were created with this creativity gene. And most of us think, well, it passed me up, right? Because I can't paint, I can't sing and play the piano, right? I can't do all of these fabulous things. And so we think, well, I'm not a creative person. I want to dig in a little bit to that and push back on this idea that only some of us were gifted with a creative gene, okay? So let's look at the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Have you guys ever read that scripture and thought about the fact that this is our first impression of God? Like literally, you guys know how important it is to make a first impression. When you go to a new place, what do? You make sure that you're wearing the appropriate clothes. You make sure that you've brushed your teeth. You make sure that you're fitting in, that you know the right things to say. You want to make a good first impression. And first impressions happen within the first 7 seconds, right? That's where your first impression is formed. And whatever you do first is going to stick in your mind. So today, when I came to be with you guys, your first impression of me is, oh, she's this creativity girl with the box. So whenever you see me now for the next 20 years, you're going to be like, you're the creativity girl with the box. Like, that's your first impression of me. This is our first impression of God. And what role is he playing here? He is who? He is a creator. God's first impression that he makes on us is that he is the creator. And then when we go a little bit further into the story, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Imagine Adam's first impression of God. I mean, when he woke up and all of a sudden he took his first breath, imagine that his first impression was of his Father who created him. I mean, that just rocks my world when I think about that our first impression of God is as a creator. And we are made in his image. So what does that mean? Well, when we look at attributes of God, when we look at how God is creative, God is an architect, he's a builder, he's a communicator, an artist. He is a storyteller. He is writing this wild, amazing, incredible story that all of us have the opportunity to be a part of. He's a systems thinker. Have you guys ever thought about like the cycle, the water cycle with rain and all of that stuff? He created that. He's a problem solver. He is an innovator. God tells us that he's still doing new things today in Isaiah 43. He's a relationship builder. He is a musician. I was sitting outside on my porch the other day, and I'm from Georgia, coastal Georgia, and so it's springtime-ish kind of down there, and all of these birds are coming around because we have this place where all these birds are, and I'm just like, God, you are an amazing musician. Amazing musician. He's a healer, he's a teacher, he's a provider, he is a reconciler, he is a motivator, and he is an organizer. Who else could organize all of these people in the world, right? When we think about how God creates, we know that he creates in so many different ways, so many different avenues. And we are made in his image. So what does that say about you? I think that says that each one of us is gifted to be creative. In some way, shape, or form, each of us has been gifted with the ability to create. So when I ask you guys who is creative, everybody raises their hand. You may not know you're creative yet. You may have not seen your creativity come to light, but that doesn't change the fact that you have been made by a creative God to be creative. So as you guys look at this list, some of you guys might say, well, yeah, I'm a problem solver, but I've never thought about how that could be creative. Absolutely, that's creative. People who are gifted to solve problems, people who are gifted to be relationship builders, people who are gifted to build things and to communicate things and to tell stories are all expressing that creativity that God has put in each and every one of us. When I was a teenager, one of the most important things that my mom ever said to me, whenever I would leave the house and go out with my friends, she would always say before I left, "And remember who you are and whose you are." And she used to say it because she knew that whenever you know who you are and whose you are, then you're going to know what to do. What if all of us in this room realized who we were, that we were created to be creative? And we all know whose we are, right? When you know who you are, when you recognize your creative gifts and you begin to lead from those and you begin to leverage those in the way that God intended, and you remember that you are his, then you're going to know how to lead your churches into creative expressions that reach new people in new places with the gospel. So here's what I want you guys to do for just a moment. I'd like for you to consider all of these different creative giftings. And you guys even have a list with some indicators in your handout that will give you a little bit more information. I'd like for you just a moment to just look at that list and circle one that you think, you know what? I think maybe that's how God created me to be creative. And then share that with the people at your table or just one or two people sitting around you. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Here's the thing, if we are all creative, if we were created by a creative God to then go and create, why is it that as the church, we always seem to be catching up with culture in the creativity department? I mean, have you noticed that? We watch culture innovates and it changes, and then we're just trying to catch up, or sometimes we're not even trying to catch up, right? Why is the church not the most creative entity on the planet? I feel like we should be, because when you know who you are and when you know whose you are, then you know what to do. So let me suggest that there are 4 big roadblocks that stand in the way of creativity. 4 big roadblocks that keep us inside our box. And I would like to believe that God wants us to move past those roadblocks so that we can be the innovators and on the cutting edge of creativity in the church. So as we look at the first roadblock, this first roadblock is the one that is the big one. I mean, like if you have like roadblock sizes, this is the one that's the size of this room, okay? And really takes up so much space in our lives. And that roadblock is fear. If we think about creativity as a superhero, okay, fear is its nemesis. And then comfort is fear's sidekick. And if we think about fear and comfort doing battle against creativity, a lot of times fear and comfort win the day. So what do we do when we have been created by a creative God to be creative? How do we battle against fear? We're going to look at 3 different types of fear, okay? There are a myriad, and we could spend a whole week on this and pull in all kinds of doctors and professionals, okay? But we're going to talk first about the fear of change, because I feel like in the church, that is one of the biggest fears that we see. How many of you guys have seen fear of change stop some innovation in your church? Right? Once again, everybody's hand is raised, correct? As I think about this, the thing that comes to mind is this graphic that I saw one time. And so I'd like for you guys to draw this somewhere in your notes, okay? I need for you guys to draw a picture, just a circle, and inside that circle write my comfort zone. Okay? And as you do this, I want you to think about, what is your comfort zone? What is most comfortable to you? For me, I am an introvert, okay? And you guys might say, well, you're doing a lot of talking tonight. Yeah, but then I'm going to have to recover from that for days, right? So I'm an introvert, and my comfort zone is to be over there in the corner, just nobody talking to me, I'm just doing my thing. Right? That's my comfort zone. Or my comfort zone is reading a book or sitting in the hotel lobby, listening in on conversations, right? So that's my comfort zone. Here's the interesting thing, though. I don't know where your comfort zone is, but I do know where God is calling you. It's right there. Draw an X somewhere else on your page. Because here's the truth of the matter. God is calling us outside of our comfort zones. And the reason is because this is what happens between your comfort zone and where God is calling you. Growth happens. Growth happens in that place. Do you guys know that nothing can grow and stay the same? Have you guys ever thought about it? So many times in the church we say, oh, we want our church to grow. I want to grow spiritually, but I want it to stay exactly the same, and I want to be the exact same person that I am today 5 years from now. Those two things don't happen at the same time. Whenever we go to where God is calling us, it's going to be outside of our comfort zone. And why is that? Because when we get outside of our comfort zone, who do we have to rely on? God. That's the point. He pushes us outside of our comfort zone and calls us outside of there because it's in that place that we rely on Him. Have you guys heard that phrase that there is no growth in the comfort zone and no comfort in the growth zone? Have you heard that? And it is so, so true. And so as we think about the fear of change and how that looks in the church, I think we've just got to educate people and say, look, we cannot grow and stay the same. We cannot grow spiritually and stay the same. We cannot grow as a church and stay the same. We cannot grow our impact in our community and stay the same. Those two things don't happen together. They don't work together. And so as we begin to educate people that just because it's uncomfortable doesn't make it wrong. One of the phrases that we love to say at the Chapel Ministries is that we need to be people who are comfortable being uncomfortable. That there needs to be a level of comfort with being uncomfortable. Because we realize that there's no fear in that because that's what God is calling us toward. We are moving toward Him. As we think about fear, one of the other things that we often experience is a fear of failure in the church, a fear of failure. And as we think about a fear of failure, I want you guys to think for just a moment about a toddler that's learning to walk, a baby that's learning to walk. How do you learn to walk when you're a baby? You fall down. Do you ever see a mom whose baby has taken their first couple steps and then that baby falls down and she says, oh, you're done. You failed at that. Never again. Never again. Right? No, the mom is like cheering on that baby. And that baby then tries to get back up and do it again. At what point in our lives does failure become something that is bad? You know, I feel like if you never fail, if you never have the opportunity to fail, then you're really not trying hard enough at whatever it is. Just recently, over the last year, I have taken up baking bread, and I am like a bread baking fiend. I cannot even tell you how many loaves of bread have gone in the trash, okay? Because in order to do something right, you've got to fail so many times in order to get there. Failure is just a normal step on a journey. And if you're not experiencing failure, then I don't know where you're headed. I don't know if you're making progress on that journey. What would it look like in our churches if we gave people the freedom to fail? If we actually said, you know what? Not only do you have the freedom to fail, but I expect you to fail. Because if we're not failing, then we're not trying hard enough. One of the quotes that I love is by a child development expert, Joseph Chilton Pierce, and he says this: to live a creative life, we must lose our fear of being wrong. So many times we equate failure with being wrong. Well, I should have known. No, it's an experiment. When you think about different things and new and innovative things that you guys are trying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't put your whole identity in this basket, in this idea. It's just an experiment. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. Let's see how it goes. At the chapel, we say that we like to fail fast. I mean, let's find it out pretty quickly if we're failing, right? So don't, make it be a 6-year failure. Make it be a 6-week failure or something. But we need to celebrate that. Hey, what are the things that we've learned from this? Because so many times when you try something and you fail, you then have knowledge that's going to make your next adventure a little bit more successful. So when we think about fear, we often think about fear of change, fear of failure, and we often think about fear of rejection. Fear of rejection. Why is it that we are so concerned whether or not someone criticizes our ideas? Have you guys ever been in a meeting where somebody expresses an idea and then everybody else kind of jumps onto that idea and says all the ways that it's not going to work, all the ways that we can't do it, and they name all these limitations, and then it goes to the side, and then that person never gives another idea ever again? You know, I was at a conference at Disney, and one of the Disney Imagineers was talking about how they create a creative culture, a culture of innovation. And there is one quote that this person said, just kind of off the cuff, and I wrote that down, and it changed the way that I see creativity. And it really freed me up from this fear of rejection in terms of giving ideas. And this is the quote right here. "Your idea is not your identity." What would it look like in your meetings if people held their ideas with open hands so loosely that they said, here, this is not my identity. This does not symbolize my worth and my value. I'm going to give it to the group, and you know what? You guys do with it what you want. And if it doesn't work out this time, fine, we'll put it in my pocket. I'll pull it out later, or sometimes you can make it better. What would it look like if your idea was not your identity? One of my favorite things to do is to be in a collaborative group with a team and then to throw out an idea and say, hey, you guys make it better. Because it's not my idea. It's not my identity. It's a thought I had, but I feel like God gave it to me to share it with you. And so many times that group dynamic will build on that idea and make it better and better and better. Let's be people that hold our ideas loosely and offer them freely and refuse to be offended when our ideas are not taken just as they are offered. That frees us from that fear of rejection. So the first big roadblock is definitely fear. The next big roadblock is negativity. Anybody experience this in their church? Negativity? No, it's just me? Just me? Here's the thing. Sometimes I think that we have this misunderstanding that negativity is a personality type. Oh, I'm just a negative person. I just can't help it. You know what the interesting thing is? That I have found that negativity is actually, it's a habit. It's a habitual response. Whenever you encounter someone who immediately says no to everything, that is actually just a habitual response in their brain. Like they've done it so much that the brain has created a no pathway that without even thinking about it, they just say no. They just say no. And here's what happens. We see what we seek. If all we are seeking is the bad side of things, then what are we going to see? The bad side of things. But yet, if we change our view and we begin to look for something different, what are we going to see? We're going to see something different. As you guys think about this, one of my favorite quotes that makes me think about negativity is actually by Lewis Carroll, and it's from his book, Through the Looking Glass. And Alice is having a conversation with the Queen. The Queen has just told Alice that she is 120 years old and a day. And this is Alice's response and their conversation back and forth. Alice says, "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "Why, when I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." What would it look like If we challenged our teams, if we challenged our people, if we challenged ourselves to think of 6 impossible things before breakfast. And who's to say that they're even impossible, right? I mean, as Christians, we serve a God of things that are always possible for him. But what if we were brave enough to go ahead and dream them? What if we were brave enough to go ahead and say them out loud, to say, hey, here's an impossible thing. What would it look like if our community were united? What would it look like if God would heal people from addiction? Can you imagine if literacy in schools was resolved in some sort of way and people were able to be good readers? What would that look like for people in the future? I think God is calling us to have a different view of the world because of who we are and whose we are. I think he's calling us to look past the limitations and the negative and to look at the things that we think are impossible and approach him in bold prayer and ask him to do these things that seem impossible. And here's the thing, when we begin to have these impossible thoughts and when we begin to train our brain in that way, do you know what we're going to see? We're going to see impossible things begin to happen. Because we're looking for impossible things to happen. We're expecting impossible things to happen. That's how we overcome that roadblock to negativity. I'm going to give you guys 2 or 3 minutes at your table just to kind of talk about what are some impossible things that you would like to just throw out. Some 6 impossible thoughts. What would those be? And how could you all as missional hubs begin praying and looking expectantly for those impossible things to begin happening? So talk about that within your group. Practice for us in our spiritual disciplines. What would it look like every day to just think of one impossible thing and then pray about it? How would that change your mindset? How would that change your view? How would that change what is happening in the world? So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to spend a little bit of time in prayer. You guys have talked about some seemingly impossible things that are impossible for us to solve alone, but we know that we serve a God of things that are possible. And so what we're going to do in this moment of prayer is I'm going to begin the prayer and I'm going to begin to lead us. And then when I say the words, Lord, hear our prayers, what we're going to do is we're all just going to pray out loud for these impossible things that we have named. And as we hear each other, we're all going to be talking at the same time. As we hear each other talking, it's going to be this beautiful picture of this community that is in prayer and that is beseeching our Heavenly Father's intervention into our lives with things that seem to be impossible, but yet we know are possible for Him. So let's pray together. Dear Lord Jesus, we know that you are doing so many good and amazing things. God, help us to open our eyes to see where you are working. Help us to open our ears, God, and hear the things that you are doing in the lives of people that are around us. God, reframe our vision. Help us to see new things that you are doing. And God, help us to boldly come before the throne and God, ask for things that seem to be impossible. Lord, in this moment, hear our prayers. God, I ask that you will be with those who are in addiction. God, that you will heal them from the things that they see.
we pray all these things, and we are watchful, and we are expectant, because we know that you are at work. In your name I pray, amen. So as we think about roadblocks, we think about fear stopping our creativity. We think about negativity preventing our creativity. Another thing that often gets in the way
are limitations. Anybody have limitations in your church? Not enough money, not enough volunteers, not enough good facilities, not enough equipment, not enough this, not enough young people, not enough that. As we think about limitations, I want to help you guys see your limitations in a different way. Because we usually think of limitations as bad things. It limits us from doing the thing that God has called us to do, right? That's why we're not doing it. But I'd like to ask you guys a question. Does God know that you have limitations? And did God give you work to do? So if God knows that you have limitations, and God still gave you a mission to accomplish, then logic would say that He means for you to accomplish that mission with those limitations. Remember when we talked about kind of defining when creativity happened? We said that it happens when limitations are combined with determination to continue. What if God gives you limitations because He wants you to be creative? What if God allows you to have some limitations so that you're forced to be creative? And in that creativity, what if that's the thing that reaches new people in new ways, in new places with the gospel? What if we begin to see our limitations not as a roadblock, but kind of like guides on the journey? Like there are things that we can't do on this journey because we have limitations. But if you look at your limitations in terms of guides, kind of like the bumpers in bowling. Any of you guys use the bumpers let's be honest. Anybody use the bumpers in bowling? Okay, there we go. One honest person in the room. Good job. So if we see our limitations in that, there's a lot of space in between those bumpers, right? There's a lot of things that we can do. Now, we can't go into somebody else's lane, but we can sure stay in our own lane. There are things that we can do. And what if we are called to leverage our limitations and be creative in how we use them instead of using our limitations as an excuse not to move toward the place that God is calling us to move toward? So as you think about this, here's an exercise that you guys can do in your team meetings when you begin to talk about limitations. Because instantly what usually happens is somebody will come up with a great idea. And then once you come up with a great idea, somebody else who is the keeper of the limitations will start naming off all your limitations. You guys know that person, don't you? Okay, everybody has one, the keeper of the limitations. And that person is going to start naming off those limitations, okay? But what if the group said, hey, we can't do that, but we can do this? What if, after saying what you can't do, then you ask the question, yes, you're right, we can't do that, but what can we do? Because when you think about the bumper guards when you're bowling, there's a lot you can do in between in the middle. There's a whole ton of things you can do in between in the middle, and you still can reach the end. There are things that you can't do, name them, but there are things that you can do. How would that change the way that your meetings operate? One of the things, whenever we talk about limitations and that keeper of the limitations person, one of the things that we like to say in team meetings is say wow before you say how. So whenever somebody comes up with a really good idea, we have a rule that you got to celebrate every idea for 30 seconds. Okay, so you got to say, oh, that's a great idea. Even in the back of your head, you're saying, that's a terrible idea. Okay, just, that's a great idea. Oh, let's talk about the greatness of your idea. Let's celebrate the greatness of your idea. 30 seconds, because that gives that person the wow. That gives that person, hey, let's celebrate the good things about your idea. And then we can talk about the how. So many times we get right to the how. Somebody says an idea, there's no wow, there's no pulling out the good part of that idea. We just start talking about how. Well, how are you going to do that? Because we can't do this. But what can we do? Well, how are you going to do that? Because we can't do this. Well, what can we do? Well, how are you going to do that? Because we don't have this. But what do we have? So what if every time you name a limitation, you extend it with a question to say, what do you have? What can you do? What might be possible? As we think about our last roadblock is the roadblock of assumptions. But before we get there, what I'd like for you guys to do is do one more drawing exercise for me, okay? And you're going to need a little bit of room. So maybe flip over to the back of a page or something like that. And here's what I'd like for you guys to do. I'm going to need everyone to draw an alien. Draw an alien. These are not going to be displayed. I'm not going to go around with a video camera and show everybody your drawing, okay? Draw an alien. Go. To look at your alien, and I want you to answer some questions about your alien by just raising your hand, okay? So here is the first question. Does your alien have some sort of appendage, like an arms or legs or something like that? Raise your hand if your alien has some sort of appendages. Fingers, toes, anything? Okay, so most of you guys have some sort of appendage. Okay, raise your hand if your alien has some sort of covering, like they have skin, fur, feathers, something like that. If your alien has some sort of covering. Okay, yeah, you're going to have to, just, what do you think, okay? All right, raise your hand if your alien has some sort of skeletal structure that supports its body and holds it up in some sort of way. Okay, most of you guys have some sort of skeleton thing. Okay, now I'm going to need you to use your imagination, all right? How many of your aliens have some sort of way to eat and receive nourishment? I mean, look at your alien and see if you think he has some sort of way to eat and receive nourishment. Okay. How many of your aliens do you think have other senses, like that maybe they have eyes, they have ears, something like that? They have those? All right. Let me ask you guys a question. Most of you guys, look at your alien, most of you guys drew yourself. Did you notice that? I mean, as you guys drew your alien, most of you guys drew yourself. Here's the thing. So here's the thing. Most of your aliens had arms and legs and appendages. You guys have arms and legs and appendages. Most of your aliens had some sort of skin or covering. You guys have a skin or a covering. Most of your aliens had some sort of skeletal system, right? And if I would ask you, most of your aliens have to receive some sort of nourishment. You guys receive some sort of nourishment. If I were to ask you, does your alien have a family? You probably would say yes, right? If I asked you if your alien did other things that were kind of human-like, you would probably say yes. But yet, I did not ask you to dream and think within any kind of parameters, did I? I gave you full range of your imagination. And many of you guys ended up drawing something that looks kind of like yourself. Do you guys know that is called structured imagination? Structured, some of you guys did think outside the box, so very good. That is called structured imagination. And structured imagination is the idea that a lot of times when we create things that look like things that we've created before. And the reason is that we bring assumptions into our creativity. We assume that aliens must have to have some way to walk around. We assume that aliens must have to eat. We assume that aliens must have to see or hear. We assume that the programs that we do should look like the programs that we've done in the past. We assume that the way that we have attracted people in the past will work in attracting people in the future. And we make these assumptions and they hinder our creativity. So as we think about assumptions, there are some key phrases for us to use, kind of like red flags to identify, hey, there's an assumption at play and we need to call it out, okay? Because anytime we are making decisions and operating based on an assumption, we're missing out on a whole host of other possibilities. We are basically jumping inside of that box and saying this is all we are capable of doing. So when you begin to hear words that are floating around your conversations like always, never, can't, won't, must, all, will, none, everyone, no one, when you hear those kinds of words, there is guaranteed to be an assumption at play. Someone is jumping in that assumption box, and there are tons of possibilities left out on the table that are not even explored. So what do you do when you call foul and you say, hey, we've got to talk about an assumption that's at play? Well, there are 3 questions that will help you challenge those assumptions. The first one is this: how is this situation similar to experiences I've had in the past? So let me give you guys an example from a church that I worked with several years ago. They were talking about how they needed to reinvigorate their early traditional service, and they really needed more people to come, and they were meeting in this huge sanctuary with about 20 people. What they needed to do was move to their chapel. But when we talked about that, well, there's a Sunday school class that meets in there, and they will never move. Never? Well, they always say no. Always? And so I began to ask them questions. Okay, well, how is this situation similar to the times that you have asked them to move in the past? Well, the last time we asked them to move, we were asking them to move for this reason and that reason and all of the, these things. Okay, well, let's talk about how they were similar. But now, number 2, what is possible now that wasn't possible then? Well, they have fewer people meeting now. Okay. And we actually have a different room that is available that wasn't available then. All right. Well, and actually, the person that's in charge of that class has stepped down, so now a new person is in charge of that class. So there are some new possibilities. And then number 3, what unique challenge does this present? There's a unique challenge in this. What is the challenge? Well, the challenge is to help people see, to help this Sunday school class see that they have the opportunity to be missional by moving to a different room. Because them moving to a different room is going to create space for new people to come to that early service in a space that fits them better. That's a unique challenge. That's a unique opportunity. Whenever you begin to hear those always, none, those generalizations bantering around, if you stop right there and say, hey, are we making assumptions? And you begin to ask some good questions, then all of a sudden you might realize, hey, there are possibilities there that we have not explored. And you're able to uncover some new things and some new ways of doing things. So as we think about all that we've heard about creativity, I want to sum it up with Soren Kierkegaard's parable that he talks about that involves some geese, okay? Let me share this with you guys. A certain flock of geese lived together in a barnyard with high walls around it. Because the corn was good and the barnyard was secure, these geese would never take a risk. One day, a philosopher goose came among them. He was a very good philosopher. And every week they listened quietly and attentively to his learned discourses. My fellow travelers on the way of life, he would say, can you seriously imagine that this barnyard with great high walls around it is all there is to existence? I tell you, there is another and a greater world outside, a world of which we are only dimly aware. Our forefathers knew of this outside world, for did they not stretch their wings and fly across the trackless wastes of desert and ocean, of green valley and wooded hill? But alas, here we remain in the barnyard, our wings folded and tucked into our sides, as we are content to paddle in the mud, never lifting our eyes to the heavens, which should be our home. The geese thought this was very fine lecturing. How poetical, they thought. How profoundly existential. What a flawless summary of the mystery of existence. Often the philosopher spoke of the advantages of flight, calling on the geese to be what they were. After all, they had wings, he pointed out. What were wings for but to fly with? Often he reflected on the beauty and the wonder of life outside the barnyard and the freedom of the skies. And every week the geese were uplifted, inspired, and moved by the philosopher's message. They hung on his every word. They devoted hours, weeks, and months to a thoroughgoing analysis and critical evaluation of his doctrines. They produced learned treatises on the ethical and spiritual implications of flight. All this they did. But one thing they never did. They did not fly. For the corn was good and the barnyard was secure. What if we were people? What if we were leaders that loved our flock of geese so much that we went to them and we told them the wonders of delving into a world of creativity and innovation and change? And we made them and allowed them to be just uncomfortable enough to leave the barnyard and to go be the people that God created them to be. Because not only are each of you created to be creative, every single person in your congregation is created to be creative. God has implanted that in them. He has gifted them with abilities to be creative, to share the gospel with new people in new ways. And what if we embrace discomfort just enough to help people live into their creative potential so that they can fly and soar and be the people that they were created to be? So I hope that you guys can take some of this back to your teams. And I hope that you guys will continue to stretch people and to help them grow. I would love to share this journey with you guys. I hope that you'll contact me. Here are a couple of different ways that you can do that. My book, Get Out of That Box, has lots of practical ideas like the Draw an Alien kind of thing that we did today and some of the other stuff that we did. If you go to getoutofThatBox.com, you'll actually be able to download a team discussion guide that you guys can use with your missional hubs as you continue to learn and retrain your brain to think in new, innovative, and creative ways. So that is getoutofThatBox.com. And I would love to meet you guys over there, sign books, have conversations. I want to hear about the innovative things that you guys are doing. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of this journey with you.